All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to FA Well Centers. I am Dr. Jake, new face, a little bit bearder, a little bit grayer, but Dr. Ben is in Atlanta with some of the staff going on, doing some trainings and some seminars, so he's having some fun out there, just trying to clean things up and make this process even better for us as well as our patients. So he asked me to kind of do a live this morning, so I'm here to answer any questions you have. Just to get started, my background, as far as one of my first careers before I even went into alternative medicine and chiropractic, I was actually in medical laboratory science. I was in research and development. So essentially what that means, one of my main jobs was to go into a lab situation. Our company actually worked with several different national reference labs, and our job was to really create the newest, latest, and greatest testing platforms. And with that, one of the things we had to do is we actually had to go and teach doctors and hospitals and at seminars and things like that. We had to teach people how to interpret lab work, how to apply it to patients, what it meant. So not just looking at highs and lows, lab work is actually extensively more complex than just what are your highs and lows. And one of the things I work with a lot of my patients and some of you that I've worked with before, the concept of just understanding how to interpret lab work properly really comes to understanding just what we call kind of the bell curve. Most people understand what the bell curve is. It's kind of just, it represents it's a statistical representation of what's going on in our bodies or in a population, so to speak. So if you remember, there's these things called standard deviations, and these just represent set percentages of the population. Well, when it comes to lab work, these represent different levels that your lab values can fall into. Those different levels represent different percentages of the population, and they represent different severities or lack of severities of conditions. So for most lab tests, what's going to wind up happening is you're going to have three primary ranges. And you're going to have this first range, which is called your optimal range. Now, that's when blood work is really nice in the center. And for all intents and purposes, if all your lab ranges are in that really nice tight center, you should be healthy for the most part, at least for the tests that we're testing. This represents about 68% of the population, okay? Now, most people, all they ever see or all their doctor ever talks to them about is what's called your medical or your reference ranges. These happen all the way out here, your medical or your reference ranges, okay? They happen outside of what statistically is referred to as two standard deviations. What that looks like as far as numbers go, this represents 2.5% of the population and 2.5%. So essentially what this means on your lab work, if you are waiting for one of your values to go high or one of your values to go low, and that's all you're concerned about, you have 95% or more of your age group, of your gender, that has a better lab value than you. So one of the things we do here at F8 Well Centers is we look at this range right here, and that's called your functional range. Okay, that comes from kind of the lab world. This is a term that's fairly common, and we want to look for values that are trending in a specific direction, because what that's going to wind up telling us is we are going to have, we're going to be able to pick up on diseases, we're going to pick up on dysfunction a lot easier and a lot faster than waiting and waiting and waiting until you have the full disease process. The other reason this is very, very helpful to do is simply because when you pick up on these ranges quicker, even if, for example, one of our first panels that we run is an anemia panel. In that anemia panel, you may not have a full anemia, you may not have too high or too low of iron or anything like that, but based on how your pattern lays out, what that tells me is how much the stomach is potentially involved, how much diet is potentially involved, how much the small intestine is potentially involved. Do you have bone marrow issues? Do you have spleen issues? So just being able to look at that lab work at a little bit of a different range is really, really going to help us understand kind of the nuances of really what's going on in the body. So not waiting until we get to these crazy outside extremes, but also just being able for us to understand what else is contributing to the dysfunction in that panel. So once again, today is live. If you have any questions for me, some of you, I've worked with Dr. Ben for a little while. I've done a few of these lives with him. I do have a background in neuroscience. After I switched out of my laboratory career, went into chiropractic school, I was able to work at the Utah Spine and Brain Clinic, working on my neuroscience postdoc. And one of the things we really wanted to focus on there was understanding brain degeneration from a neurodegenerative standpoint. So that's the classic Alzheimer's and dementia and the Parkinson's and things like that. The other thing we really wanted. Good morning, Lori. How you doing? Or Becky, you typed the name in. So one of the things we really wanted to do there is start understanding what is the possibility of helping people calm down brain inflammation. How do we reverse some of these? Because the brain's kind of a really hard organ to really treat. It's very protective. Depending on what's happening chemically in the body, really tends to influence how our brain is going to adapt and react. Now, kind of the first question, just a really quick one. How many hours of sleep should a person get a night? Now, that really depends on REM cycle. The general 8 hours is actually a pretty good time frame you're really going to want to shoot for. That is primarily because of what's called the REM cycle or your sleep cycle. You're supposed to go through about 2 cycles every single night. But if you're not able to hit both of those 2 cycles, that's when you're really going to start feeling the fatigue, or when you wake up in the morning, you're going to be really tired. That happens to a lot of people. Or sometimes you'll hit that first cycle and the second cycle due to blood sugar issues or due to noise or light pollution or whatnot. You're going to wind up not hitting that second REM cycle. So although you're getting rest, you're not actually getting that restorative sleep. Because restorative sleep is actually quite different than just taking a nap or resting through the night. Most patients that we see with a lot of sleep issues, a lot of them tend to come in between that 5 or 6 hour range, where it usually means they're getting almost a full REM cycle, and then that second cycle is really having kind of a problem there. So in general, most people are around that 8 hours. It's about 4 hours per cycle. I know me personally, I've even had sleep studies done on me. My sleep cycle runs just under 3.5 hours. So for me, 7 hours is actually a really, really good sweet spot for me to hit. Some people, it's a little bit more. You can go up to 9, but it's really right around that 8 range. And you want those restorative cycles because that allows the brain to really shut down. It allows the liver to really shut down. No, that's a great question, because sleep is one of the fundamental things of health, of healing, and actually maintaining a really, really good rate. Just a sec, sorry. So I'm not as good as Dr. Ben. Making sure I keep up and walk through the questions, right? Because it kind of bounces around a little bit. So my husband and I just had some blood work done. Fasting, LDL was 23, potassium 5.7, C-reactive protein 0.73, A1C was 5. Are these good figures? So overall, LDL is trending high. And then when it comes to C-reactive, potassium is trending just a little bit high, and a little bit outside of range. C-reactive protein is trending a little bit high, and 5.3 on your A1C. Overall, if you want to talk about the optimal range for A1C, it is 5.1 to 5.3. And then 5.2 is what we kind of consider the best. Anything under that starts to become hypoglycemic. Anything over that becomes hyper. The one thing with blood sugar, and this is what I go through with a lot of my patients, is I love the A1C. I love the information that it gives us. It gives us that average blood glucose over the last 3 months. But one of the reasons we don't do a fasting blood glucose in our clinic, because I'm really interested to see what your body does in the presence of food, how it reacts to food. And that's where we start to pick up on how much people are swinging. A lot of times what people don't realize is when you do a fasting blood glucose, if you need any fasting blood glucose, what's going to wind up happening is normally you go to bed at night, you fast through the night, and you go into the doctor's office to get your blood drawn in the morning, okay? By the time you hit that, you've been out of food for 8 to 9 hours or so, or maybe even 10, you're getting a little bit hungry. Well, you have natural compensation mechanisms that allow you to come back up. And those are normally you produce cortisol or you produce a molecule called glycogen. Those stimulate the liver or they stimulate muscle tissue to actually put glucose into the bloodstream. So by the time you're taking that fasting blood glucose, we actually see that there's a good chance you're back up in those normal ranges because what has happened is your body has already gone into compensation mode. It's already said, hey, look, my blood sugar is too low. I need to put blood sugar in the bloodstream. So people get a falsely good, sometimes, fasting blood glucose. What we really like to see is what your body's doing with glucose. What's your insulin response at? Because although your average may be good, what we find with a lot of patients, I see 5.3s, all day long. When I get a fasting blood glucose of 5.3, and yet these people, when we look at how their blood sugar is reacting on a meal by meal or a daily basis, they're going all the way down into the 60s and jumping up to the 140s. And it's actually not a hard thing to see when you do a non-fasting. And that means these people, overall, their average is pretty good. They're swinging pretty high. And when we talk about like a high C-reactive protein, or why am I having tissue destruction, why are my LDLs going off, that's a really, really, really big key indicator that you're actually most likely swinging with that blood sugar. And those swings are honestly what cause most people the most issues. Every time you go low, the brain is going to drop out. The brain's going to get scared. It says, I'm running out of fuel. It compensates. It uses hormones to bring those back up. And then every time you go high, that's metabolic compensation. You have to produce insulin. You have to jam it into cells. You're trying to use fat utilization. And so you're basically several times a day, you're having these highs and lows, but then you go get your A1C checked and it's like, hey, I'm doing okay. I'm not diabetic. But there's a whole lot more to look at when it comes to blood sugar. And then that's potassium. So sodium, potassium chloride, as well as calcium. Calcium is more related to parathyroid. Those should be in a pretty tight range most of the time. And so when they start creeping out of range, that is going to tell us look at a little bit in the kidney of, is the kidney able to balance charge? Is it able to balance pH? And if it's not able to do that, then now we have to start asking the deeper question as, why is the kidney not able to perform its just most basic function? So great question. There is a lot we can read in from lab work. And there's another question here, another DM, does everyone need to take vitamin D? No, surprisingly not. So one of the tricks with vitamin D is we have to understand that one of the reasons it's called a vitamin is because we can't make the molecule entirely ourselves. One of the reasons like hormones are not vitamins is we can take bits and pieces all around the body and we can manufacture and build hormones, and we can build enzymes, and we can build cells. So those aren't vital for us to intake. Vitamin D is it's kind of a hybrid. We need the base model of vitamin D. And you can get that from a lot of different foods. A lot of times, mostly you're going to be getting that from vegetables as a really high source. I know the dairy industry has touted that it has a lot of vitamin D. However, due to the calcium content and sugar content, things like that, most of that vitamin D is utilized in other ways, not necessarily for what we want it to be used for, which is an immune regulator. It helps with the mucosal membrane. It helps break up biofilms. It helps with nervous system transduction. So we have to understand that we need the base model in our diet, and vegetables, I think, is one of the best ways to get that base molecule. It goes all the way down to our large intestine, and in our large intestine, the good bacteria in our large intestine and our intestinal cells work together, and they put the base molecule into the bloodstream. That base molecule goes up to the liver, and the liver kind of adds a little molecule and alters it a little bit. Then it goes over to the kidney adds another molecule, alters it a little bit. Then it goes up to the skin, and ultraviolet radiation reconfigures and activates the molecule. So a lot of times if someone's chronically low on vitamin D, I ask the second or the follow-up question is, why are you low on vitamin D? Is it because your immune system's ramped up and using all of your vitamin D and it's constantly kind of being used up? That's one thing we have to look into, whether that's a GI issue, an autoimmune issue, a chronic infection, something like that. Or is something along that 4-step process not happening? Do you have good gut biome balance and a healthy large intestine to absorb the original base molecule? Is your liver able to add its portion? Is your kidney able to add its? I will say most of the time, people that aren't in kidney failure, it's not your kidney's fault. It's rarely we see it be the kidney's fault. And honestly, you should have, depending on the research you follow, it depends on between about around 10 nanograms per milliliter of vitamin D. That's 10 to 15 is about the fluctuation you're going to get between winter and summer. So if you take your vitamin D and you're down in the 20s or 30s, go ahead and add 10 or 15, and guess what? You're still low, which means there's something going on in your immune process, and it's not just you're not getting enough sun. So if it's not the sun's fault and it's not the kidney's fault, a lot of times we're going to default to, okay, something's going on with my liver potentially, and then also something's potentially going on with my ability to absorb it in the large intestine. So no, not everyone needs to take it, but we just see it as a very, very common thing. I'm the typical eat a small lunch and get tired right after, or get very shaky, very weak if I wait too long to eat. Is this blood sugar? Yes, yes, that is. So the symptoms of blood sugar, the classic symptoms of low blood sugar are what we call hangry. And I always joke that my son made up a new word to describe my daughter, which is hangressive. It's kind of one of my new favorite terms now. But it's also random anxiety. You get the shakes, or you kind of the body starts shutting down. Because essentially what happens is every time blood sugar starts dipping low, what ends up happening is your body says, hey, look, I'm now in survival mode. So all of my luxury body functions and items like making good hormones, remembering, running my frontal cortex with remembering names and thought and learning, everything starts shutting down and it goes into survival mode. One of the biggest reasons people get the afternoon slump actually doesn't have to do with lunch, it has to do with breakfast. So one of the biggest things that I work with people on, if you tend to be hypoglycemic, one of the things we work with people on is how many times you're eating a day and really starting to stabilize your blood sugar at a higher level. But one of the other reasons is because you're not eating a good enough breakfast, or it's sugar, starch-filled breakfast or something like that. One of my suggestions would be to those type of people that are having issues with that is you need to eat a high-fat, high-protein breakfast, because fats and proteins burn out at about a 4-hour rate, fats burn out about a 6 to 8 hour rate. So if you're eating breakfast, say at 7 o'clock in the morning, then that 11 o'clock slump should be taken care of by your ability to burn proteins for energy. And then that 2 to 3 o'clock slump, you should be carried through with your fats. And lunch is more of just a booster. Sometimes I tell patients, look, if you can't eat several times a day more often to allow your blood sugar not to go as low, one thing I recommend to them is try and get 40% of your total calorie intake at breakfast. And a lot of people are like, nope, I cannot do that. I can't eat breakfast, it makes me feel sick. If breakfast makes you feel sick, congratulations, you're what's called a cortisol flatliner. You are not getting a normal cortisol curve that goes up in the morning, drops down, because normally cortisol is supposed to drive up really, really, really high in the morning. It's supposed to make you want to go to the bathroom, it's supposed to make you want to eat, and it's supposed to stimulate you and get you ready for the day. If that's not happening in the morning, there's a good chance that you're relying on cortisol to produce energy slowly throughout the day and night because you're constantly dipping too low. So now the brain's using not only some of its function, it's using energy to make more hormones to help balance out blood sugar. And you never get that spike in the morning because you're producing a constant amount night and day. So people that are like, I can't eat breakfast, that is one of the favorite things I like to hear, because I already know, okay, what direction do I need to go with this person? And then, yeah, that whole late morning or mid-afternoon kind of slump, that's usually because your blood sugar is starting to dive in the morning and you're having to have that compensative mechanism. All right, let's keep on going. That is a great question because that one comes up all the time. with all our patients. When we eat, doesn't that make your blood sugar higher? Is there a number that it should not go higher than after eating? So this is actually a really good question. It depends. So how reactive is your body to blood sugar? This depends on a lot of different things. In general, if you have a really stable, like 5.2 A1C, your average blood sugar is around 90 or so. I would not expect a normal, healthy, well-balanced meal to take you over 120-ish. 130 maybe if there's a lot of carbohydrates in there. But if you're spiking any higher than that, you're having a problem dealing with glucose in the blood. And that's usually a sign that you were potentially bordering on some insulin resistance. But one key point that I really want to bring up to this is where exercise has its secret little help for us. You have what are called GD4 receptors sitting on almost all of your vital organ tissues and your muscle cells. Your vital organ tissue has basically a stable amount, but your muscle cells have a varied amount. If you use your muscles a lot, then there's a good chance that you're going to increase the number of those receptors. The reason we like those receptors is those receptors sit out in the bloodstream, and when glucose comes by, they grab glucose, put it into the cell without the need of insulin. So this is why, people that exercise all the time and are really, really fit, they can actually kind of go out and have a crazy weekend and eat a big dinner, and their blood sugar can actually stay pretty stable because your body is naturally helping it bring in because those cells themselves are hungrier. So yes, blood sugar is always going to usually go up when you eat. One fascinating part, to tie this into the last question, one interesting thing is some people, when we have them track their glucose on their blood sugar monitor, they're going to notice if they're starting to get healthy, they have an increase in blood sugar. They have this blood sugar spike in the morning when they wake up. That's called your cortisol awakening response, putting blood sugar in your blood. And then they'll eat food and they'll actually watch their blood sugar drop. That's a normal response because your cortisol is putting glucose in the blood to wake you up, get you going, give you a drive and energy for food. But it's not supposed to sustain that. You're supposed to eat food. And some people see their blood sugar actually drop and then kind of level out as they use that glucose of what they just ate. So great question. Those kind of paired really, really well together. We are trying to access for mold in the walls of our water damage. How do you recommend for our youngest one who is showing symptoms that may be linked to mold? So testing for mold, I will say, I actually can't give you the best recommendation. One of the things that I would work with, so both LabCorp Quest, ARUP, I think Principal Labs, potentially Douglas Labs. There are several labs that run some options on testing. One thing I would recommend for you is look into the method of testing, and I want you to look for what is called mass spectrometry. Mass spectrometry is going to generally be one of your best ways to test for mold, because essentially what it does is you take the sample, you kind of liquefy it, put it, like dilute it as much as you can, and you send it through this analyzer that judges the molecules that are in that. Now, the analyzer has a kind of a library or bank of almost every single molecule that we know to actually test for, and some of those are kind of old molecules and whatnot. And those generally have a higher accuracy point to identify whether mold is present or not. Because the tricky thing about mold is it doesn't stay active in the bloodstream a lot for very long. It tends to be pretty good at burying into tissue, which is why you can get a false negative, and it's not necessarily a false negative, it's just that you don't have anything active in the bloodstream at that time. So think of mold similar in that aspect to sometimes a virus that can kind of burrow into tissue and go latent. Molds are actually quite tricky to test for. So once again, I would try and look for a laboratory that when you can call them or you can go on their website, and a lot of times they'll actually say the method in which they test. If you have what's called an antigen assay, those tend to be pretty suspect. They can be good, they can be bad, but they're not the most accurate thing in the world. All right. I was 219, January 4th, dropped to 208 in 4 weeks. It seemed to have plateaued now after 2 months, 63-year-olds. I eat clean, lift 3 to 5 days a week, fast regularly. Could it be low T or slow metabolism? So that's a great question, Rusty. So you are at the trick, and you probably know this, if you are active and stuff like that, age does play a factor, but not as big as factor as people let it. One of the tricks with burning fat, and this actually comes down to what is in our fat cells and what do we use our fat cells for. One really big trick with fat cells is our fat cells are our body's storage locker. And essentially what happens is if our liver, our large intestine, and our kidney cannot flush out trash just from normal cell turnover, from breaking down hormones and things like that, if it can't push that trash out of the body, what it does is says, okay, I have to put this somewhere because this trash is kind of dangerous for my body. It makes me feel really bad. So it shoves it into a fat cell, because inside a fat cell, you have what they call these adipose molecules or fat molecules. And these are big globular molecules, quite stable, and they can surround and kind of neutralize that trash. Here's the trick though, your brain keeps an exact tally of what's in those fat cells. So when you go to eat right and exercise and you're ready to open up that fat cell and burn that fat cell, your brain checks in with your liver, kidney, and large intestine, and it says, hey, guys, I'm about to open up that fat cell. Can you take the extra workload of removing that trash from the body? And if they signal up to the brain and they say, no, we're putting that in the fat cell for a reason because we can't keep up, then a lot of times it isn't the fact that you're eating poorly. It isn't the fact that you have you're not exercising hard enough. A lot of times you might be even exercising too hard and stressing out your endocrine system. It's the fact that your detoxification organs, or the kidney, liver, and the large intestine that help remove the trash from the body, they're actually not healthy enough to take that extra workload. So that's going to be a really, really big key concept for a lot of people with weight loss, which is why a lot of times when we work with patients, I know when a patient gets to a certain health level with their liver and kidney and large intestine, because in 1 week, they'll drop 6 to 10 pounds. I mean, they'll just go down, and without any change in activity, they're on kind of the same diet we put them on, but all of a sudden they'll just drop because your liver finally gets a chance to catch up and says, okay, let's start removing stuff. Because your body actually does not want to be overweight. It doesn't like having to push, grow more capillaries, have more stress on its joints. It's not a place that it really likes to be. So if you're having an issue with that, that's really where I would turn and kind of address that area first of really how healthy is my liver, how healthy is my kidney, how healthy is my gut biome and my large intestine at removing trash. So, all right, thank you for everyone that hopped on this morning. Hopefully this was informative and helpful. It's about time for me to close this out and go see patients for the day. If you have any other questions for either me or Dr. Ben or anyone on the team, go ahead and direct message them. Brittany is really good about kind of directing those questions to us, and we're going to reply to as soon as we can. So thanks for hopping on, everyone. It was great to see you, and enjoy your Thursday and have a great weekend.